5 men bought me for $3,000 in 1965, and that very day decided when and how I would die. But today, at 75 years old, I'm here to tell a story that many prefer to pretend doesn't exist in our America. My name is Anne Frances Sanders, and everyone here in Westridge, rural Kentucky, knows me as Miss Anne the Craftswoman, the lady who transformed corn husks and fabric scraps into pieces that even tourists take home. But few know the thorny path I traveled to get here. Perhaps that's why I decided to record these videos. Because certain truths need to be told before I leave this world, and some secrets have been buried long enough. I was born in 1948 in a small settlement called Cougar Hollow, which doesn't even exist on maps anymore. It was about 20 miles from what is now Jefferson County, so tiny, it didn't even have a hospital. That's why I came into this world by the hands of a midwife, Miss Hattie, in a wooden house with a dirt floor. My mother, Celeste, didn't survive childbirth. I lost her before even knowing the warmth of her embrace or hearing her voice singing me to sleep. But I was blessed with my father, Zach, a simple man with a heart as big as the Kentucky sky. He planted a little bit of everything: corn, wheat, beans, and raised some chickens and a pig or two when we could manage it. We didn't have much, but there was never a shortage of food on the table or love in that house. My father taught me about the world while we worked together in the fields. "You see, Annie girl," he would say, while showing me how to plant a seedling, "the earth is generous to those who respect it. You put in a tiny seed, take good care of it, and it gives you back a plant full of life. People are like that too. You give love, you receive love back." I didn't have many toys like children today. My dolls were made from corn cobs with husks for hair and dresses made from scraps my father got from the neighbors. He did everything possible so I wouldn't feel the absence of a mother so much. But there were moments like when other girls had their hair braided by their mothers, or were learning family recipes, that the emptiness ached deep in my chest. I grew up this way, daughter of the land, running barefoot through the woods, learning to recognize plants that healed and those that killed. I listened to the stories of the elders on full moon nights when we gathered in the churchyard to share tales and pass the time. It was a simple childhood, but happy in its own way. My father, even being a rough countryman, had a special gentleness with me. I think he saw my mother in my eyes, and that both comforted and pained him. As many have said, things began to change when I was 15, though I didn't understand then how dramatically they would change. My father, who was already past 50, met Carmen at a county fair in Springfield. She was about 20 years younger than him, a widow too, with a way of speaking softly, and a smile that hid well what lay behind it. Unlike the women from our settlement, she wore red lipstick, had painted nails, and smelled of store-bought perfume. She claimed she was from Chicago and had come to the countryside looking for a quieter life. My heart tightened the first time I saw her. It wasn't jealousy as my father thought. It was something deeper, a premonition. One of those warnings that creeps up your spine and makes your neck go cold, even on a hot day. But who was I to say anything? My father deserved companionship, someone to care for him in his old age, and she seemed so interested in his stories, so attentive to his every word. 6 months after their first meeting, Carmen was already living with us, and they had married in a simple ceremony in the town's little church. At first, she made an effort to please me. She cooked my favorite dishes, brought me a new dress as a gift, even taught me how to apply lipstick to look pretty for the boys. But her eyes never smiled when her mouth smiled at me. And when my father wasn't around, she simply ignored me as if I were invisible, or worse, as if I were an obstacle to be removed. I should say I tried, my dears. I swear I tried to open my heart to that woman. I helped with household chores without complaining, complimented her cooking, listened attentively to her stories about life in the big city. But there was a wall between us, built with bricks of distrust, that neither of us knew how to tear down, though now I suspect she never wanted to. My father, poor man, didn't notice anything. Or perhaps he didn't want to notice. He was bewitched by that woman, as if he had drunk one of those love potions that the local healers prepared to bind the hearts of indecisive men. When I tried to say something, he would just smile and pat my head. That's just daughter's jealousy, Anne. It'll pass. You'll see how Carmen is a blessing that fell from heaven for us. Blessed ignorance. If I could go back in time, I would have screamed, begged, done anything to open his eyes. But fate was already tracing its twisted paths, and we, like blind ants, were just following the sugar trail that would lead us straight into the trap. It was in January 1965, at the height of winter, when my world completely collapsed. My father had gone to town to sell our small bean crop. He returned after nightfall with a high fever and chest pain that made him bend over like an old man. Carmen prepared a lemon balm tea and put him to bed. "You'll feel better tomorrow, honey," she said with a certainty that I only understood much later. But he didn't get better. In the early morning, I woke to her screams. When I reached the bedroom, my father was staring blankly at the ceiling, his mouth open in silent astonishment. He had passed during sleep without saying goodbye, without giving me one last piece of advice or a final blessing. Now, you who are watching me might think I'm telling this with a calmness that doesn't match the pain. But 57 years have passed. Pain becomes a callus on the soul. It's still there, but it no longer bleeds. The funeral was quick, as was customary in rural areas. There was no way to preserve the body in that cold, and the cemetery was an hour's walk from our house. I remember the weight of the simple coffin made of cheap wood carried by the neighbors. I remember the sound of earth falling on it. I remember the rough hands of acquaintances squeezing mine, saying words that made no sense to me at that moment. Carmen cried, and how she cried. She sobbed loudly, needed to be supported so she wouldn't fall, repeated my father's name like a litany. But when we returned home, when the last neighbors had gone, and it was just the two of us, she wiped away her tears as if dusting furniture. Her eyes were as dry as the cemetery earth. "Sit down, girl. We need to talk," she said, lighting a cigarette, a vice she had never shown in front of my father. I sat at the kitchen table, still dazed by the loss, not imagining that the worst was yet to come. "Your father wasn't the man you thought," she began, exhaling smoke through her nostrils. "He had debts, many debts. He owed dangerous people who don't play around." This didn't make sense. My father was the most honest person I'd ever known. He lived simply, precisely, so he would never owe anything to anyone. He himself used to say, "If you owe, you sell yourself, and I was born free and want to die free." "What debts?" I asked, my voice still choked with tears. "Duh, gambling," she replied promptly. "Your father gambled, bet everything he had. Why do you think we never managed to have anything of value? Why do you think he sold the crops for any pittance? It was to pay the interest on the debts, but the principal just kept growing." I shook my head, incredulous. It was a blatant lie, I knew. My father was never one to gamble, not even an innocent card game after church. But before I could protest, she continued, "The men he owed are coming tomorrow. They want the house, the land, everything. And if they don't have anything to take, they'll take us instead." She took a long drag. "Or rather, they'll take you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, take me?" "They approached me while you were at the cemetery. They said your father's debt is too big to be paid with this piece of land. But they made an offer." She hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "There's a group of businessmen, people from New York, who are setting up a big operation here in the region. They need girls to work, cook, clean, that sort of thing. The men said that if you go work for these businessmen for a while, the debt will be settled." "What businessmen? What business? And for how long?" The questions tumbled out of my mouth, one after another. "A big ranch, one of those modern ones with machines and everything. From what I understand, they're bringing people from outside to clear land and plant soy. They need people to take care of the ranch where the workers will stay." She stubbed out her cigarette on a saucer. "As for how long, I can't say for sure. A year, maybe 2. Depends on how much your father owed." I was 17, almost 18. I had never left that settlement, never worked for strangers. But what could I do? It was either this or lose the land my father had loved so much, the only place I had known as home. And if I don't go, I asked a last thread of resistance. The look Carmen gave me was as cold as a knife blade. Then they take the land, the house, and the two of us end up on the street or worse. These men don't joke around, Anne. Your father knew what he was getting into. That night, I cried until I had no more tears. I cried for my father, for the injustice of the situation, for the fear of the unknown. I knelt beside the bed and prayed as I had never prayed before, asking God to show me another path, a way out that wouldn't separate me from the only place I knew as home. But no divine answer came, only the silence of the night, and in the distance, the sound of Carmen packing her things in the room that once belonged to my father. The next morning, with the sun still rising timidly on the horizon, an old, noisy Jeep stopped in front of our house. 3 men got out, a fat one with a straw hat who seemed to be the leader, a tall, thin one with a scar that cut across his face from temple to chin, and a younger one not much older than me who kept his eyes lowered as if ashamed to be there. Carmen was already up, dressed as if she were going to town, the red lipstick impeccable on her thin lips. She pushed me toward my room. Go get ready. Take only the essentials, they don't have all day. With trembling hands, I put some clothes in a bundle along with a photo of my father and the rosary that had belonged to my mother, the only objects of sentimental value I owned. When I returned to the living room, the men were talking in low voices with Carmen, who was smiling in a way I had never seen before. Here she is, announced my stepmother as if presenting merchandise. Healthy, strong, knows how to cook and clean. She'll serve your employer's purposes well. The fat man looked me up and down as if evaluating a head of cattle. Yes, she seems adequate. Are the documents ready? Carmen handed him a manila envelope. Everything as agreed. It was at that moment that a chill ran down my spine. What documents could those be? What was really happening there? Can I say goodbye to my stepmother? I asked, my voice almost a whisper. The fat man shrugged. Be quick, we have a long road ahead. I approached Carmen, who smiled that fake smile that never reached her eyes. Thank you for raising me. I said, the words coming out mechanically. It wasn't what I wanted to say, but what I could say in front of those men. She hugged me, a cold, calculated embrace, and then she whispered in my ear words that froze my blood. Goodbye, stepdaughter. Don't worry about coming back. No one expects you to return. Before I could react, I was pushed toward the Jeep. The man with the scar shoved me into the back seat next to the younger guy, who continued to avoid my gaze. The engine roared, and we began to move away from the only home I had ever known. Through the window, I saw Carmen waving that fake smile still on her lips. And then, when she thought we were too far away to see, she did something that confirmed my worst fears. She took a thick wad of money from her pocket and began to count it right there in front of the house, where my father had died less than a week ago. That was the last time I saw that woman. And it was when I understood there was no debt at all, that my father probably never gambled in his life, that I wasn't going to work to pay off any debt. I had been sold. The Jeep followed dirt roads I had never seen, raising red dust that came in through the open windows and stuck to sweaty skin. No one spoke for hours. The fat man drove with concentration, occasionally wiping sweat from his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. The one with the scar smoked one cigarette after another, looking out the window with bored indifference. The young man beside me kept his hands between his knees, his eyes fixed on his own feet. After what felt like an eternity, when the sun was already high in the sky, I timidly asked, "Where are we going? What kind of work will I do?" The man with the scar turned a malicious smile on his thin lips. "Quiet. You speak when told to speak." The fear that was already settled in my chest grew, spreading like poison through my veins. Something was very wrong indeed. We traveled all day, stopping only once for the men to eat at a roadside store. To me, they gave only a piece of hard bread and a cup of water. When night fell, we were already far from any place I could recognize. The stars seemed different. The air had another smell. Even the sounds of nocturnal animals sounded strange to my ears. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, the jeep entered an even more precarious road that cut through extensive pasture. In the distance, I saw lights, a large construction that I later discovered to be an old ranch house from times when cattle reigned absolute in those lands. When the vehicle stopped, my legs were numb from the journey and my mouth dry from thirst and fear. The man with the scar pulled me by the arm with enough force to leave marks. "We've arrived," announced the fat man, getting out of the jeep with a sigh of relief. "Take her inside Tonho. The boss should arrive early tomorrow." I was dragged into the main house, passing through a wide porch with wooden flooring that creaked with each step. Inside, the furniture was sparse and old, some worn chairs, a long table, kerosene lamps that cast ghostly shadows on the peeling walls. There were other men inside playing cards and drinking whiskey. When we entered, everyone stopped to observe me with looks that made me want to shrink until I disappeared. "Is this the new merchandise?" asked one of them, a bald man with a prominent belly. "This very one," replied the man with the scar, Tonho, as they had called him. "The stepmother sold her cheap, $3,000. $3,000. That was the price of my life, less than the value of 2 head of cattle at that time. "Where's the contract?" asked another man, older with gray hair at the temples. The fat man, who had followed us inside, took from his pocket the envelope that Carmen had handed him. "Here, all signed just as he likes it." The older man took the envelope, opened it, and examined the papers in the faint light of the lamp. "Seems in order. Transfer of guardianship and waiver of all rights. Signed and notarized." He laughed, a sound that gave me chills. "This Carmen is smart. Did everything right to avoid problems later." That's when the full understanding of my situation hit me like lightning. There was no modern ranch. There were no businessmen from New York. There was no job as a cook or maid. There were only these men, this isolated house, and a contract that transformed me into their property. What? What are you going to do with me?" I managed to ask, my voice almost disappearing in terror. The older man approached, gripping my chin forcefully to make me look into his eyes. "I'll be very clear, girl, since you're going to stay with us for a good while until you wear out or die, whichever comes first. You're ours now. Your stepmother sold you with documents and everything like you sell a mare or a cow. And we're going to use you in any way we want, as many times as we want, with whoever we want." My legs weakened. I would have fallen if Tonho hadn't been holding me by the arm. "Take her to the back room," ordered the older man. "Tomorrow, when the boss arrives, we'll start the real work." I was dragged down a dark hallway to a small, stuffy room with only a thin mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. The door was locked from the outside, and I found myself alone in the darkness with only a sliver of moonlight coming in through a high barred window. I fell to my knees, the tears finally coming in an uncontrollable torrent. I cried for my father, for myself, for the cruel fate that awaited me. I prayed, begged, bargained with all the saints I knew. But that night, no divine help came, only silence and darkness, and the terrible certainty that, as the gray-haired man had said, I would stay there until I wore out or died. What I didn't know on that desperate night was that my story wouldn't end on that ranch, that I would find within me a strength I didn't know I possessed, that I would survive to tell this story decades later to people who weren't even born when it all happened. I spent that first night awake, my eyes burning from so much crying, my body aching from the journey, and my soul broken into 1,000 pieces. Every noise startled me. The wind on the old tiles, the creaking of aged wood, the croaking of frogs in the nearby swamp. With the first ray of sun entering through the small barred window, I heard movement in the house, male voices, plates banging, the smell of strong coffee invading even that small back room. I huddled in the corner furthest from the door, hugging my knees as if I could make myself small enough to disappear. It wasn't long before the key turned in the lock. It was the young man from the Jeep carrying a mug of black coffee and a piece of hard bread. His eyes remained lowered, avoiding mine, as if he was ashamed of what he was part of. "Eat," he said, placing the mug and bread on the floor near me.
"The boss is already arriving."
I was so thirsty that I drank the coffee in one gulp, even burning my tongue. The bread was hard, but my stomach ached with hunger. Please," I whispered, grabbing the hem of his shirt as he turned to leave. "Help me escape. I don't belong here." He finally looked into my eyes. He was young, maybe early 20s, with a face that could have been handsome, if not for the constant expression of fear. "No one escapes from here," he replied, his voice almost as low as mine. "The last one who tried—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the way he swallowed hard said it all. What's your name?" I asked, trying to establish some human connection, some bridge that might save me later. "Yeah, Jimmy," he answered, and for the first time, I noticed his accent. He wasn't from Kentucky. He sounded more like the Tennesseans who sometimes passed through our village. "But knowing my name doesn't help. I can't help you. No one can." With that, he left, locking the door behind him. About 2 hours later, I heard the sound of a car arriving, a powerful engine different from the old Jeep that had brought me. Animated voices, greetings, laughter. The boss had arrived. I ran my hands through my tangled hair, trying to fix myself up by pure instinct, as if that mattered, as if it could improve my situation in some way. The door opened violently, and Tanho pulled me by the arm. "Come, the boss wants to see you." I was dragged to the room where the men had been playing cards the night before. Now seated in an armchair that seemed out of place in that decadent environment, too new, too expensive, was a middle-aged man. Well-trimmed gray hair, light linen suit, gold watch on his wrist. He looked like a politician, or a rich rancher from the region, the kind that appeared in newspapers that rarely reached our settlement. Around him, like obedient watchdogs, were the men from the night before, including the fat man who drove the Jeep and the old man with gray hair at the temples. All seemed anxious to please, offering drinks, cigarettes, smiling at every word of that man. "So this is the new acquisition?" asked the man in the suit, observing me with cold eyes behind gold-rimmed glasses. There was no lust in his gaze, which was perhaps even more frightening. It was as if he was evaluating an object, something soulless, without value beyond its utility. "Yes, doctor," replied the old man with gray hair. "From the Westridge region. Orphan documents in order, everything as agreed." The man, doctor, they called him, stood up and walked around me, examining me as if I were a piece of cattle at auction. "Age?" 17, almost 18. The fat man promptly replied. "Health perfect as far as we can tell. Grew up on a farm, she's strong. Previous experience." There was a moment of embarrassed silence. "None that we know of, Doctor," the old man with gray hair finally replied. The stepmother didn't mention anything. The doctor smiled a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Better that way. I like raw material without previous vices or habits." He stopped in front of me, raising my chin with a finger to force me to look at him. "What's your name, girl?" I swallowed hard, tasting fear in my mouth. "Anne," I replied, my voice almost disappearing. "Anne Frances Sanders." "Well, Anne Frances," he said, still holding my chin. "I hope you've understood your situation. You were legally acquired. I have documents that your stepmother signed transferring your guardianship to me. These documents say you're my employee, working to pay off your late father's debt. But we both know that's just a formality, don't we?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Fear had frozen my voice. The truth," he continued, "is that you were bought. I paid good money for you. And like any property, you have a specific purpose." He finally released my chin, returning to his armchair. "You will serve the men who work for me in all the ways they desire for as long as I decide you should serve." A chill ran down my spine. Even in my small-town innocence, I knew what that meant. And if I refuse, I asked, finding a thread of courage at the bottom of my soul. The doctor smiled again, that cold, calculated smile.
Try it,
he replied simply. Then, as if he were discussing the weather or the harvest, he turned to the other men. You can start. I want to see if the investment was worth it. What happened next, my dear listeners, is something that still costs me to tell, even after so many decades. How do you narrate the unnarratable? How do you put into words the destruction of a soul? I'll try to be direct without being crude, honest without being explicit. There are certain pains that, even when shared, remain only ours. I was taken to a different room, larger than the previous one, with a real bed, a privilege that I soon understood was not for my comfort, but to facilitate what would follow. Tonho, the man with the scar, was the first, then the fat one. Then others I didn't even know, men who arrived throughout the day, ranch hands from other farms in the region, bodyguards, drivers, all knowing there was fresh meat, as they said, laughing among themselves. I resisted at first. I fought, scratched, bit, screamed, until my voice disappeared. But there were many of them. They were strong, and with each resistance, the violence increased. Soon I learned that it was better to disconnect my mind, to send my thoughts far away to the happy days with my father, to the stories the old folks told on moonlit nights, to the prayers I learned in childhood. The doctor observed everything, the first time sitting in a chair in the corner of the room, calmly drinking whiskey, as if he were watching any ordinary spectacle. He didn't participate. Never participated, I later discovered. His pleasure came from elsewhere, from absolute control, from seeing suffering without needing to dirty his own hands. When I was finally left alone, it was already late at night. My body was broken, marked, aching in ways I never imagined possible. I curled up in a corner of the bed, trembling not from cold, but from a fear so deep that it seemed to have embedded itself in my bones. That's when I heard the door open again. It was Jimmy, the boy with the lowered eyes. He brought water, a damp cloth, and a bottle of herbs. To clean the wounds, he said, avoiding looking directly at me, and the herbs help with the pain. I accepted in silence, my throat too raw to speak. As I drank the bitter herbal mixture, I noticed that his hands were trembling. Why are you here? I finally asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. You don't seem like them. He shrugged, a tired movement. Debt like everyone who's trapped here in one way or another? He paused, looking directly into my eyes for the first time. I was a ranch hand on a farm the doctor bought. I had an agreement with the former owner who would pay me at the end of the season. When the doctor took over, he said the debt was his, now that I would work for him, until it was paid. That was 3 years ago. And are you part of this? I asked, each word hurting in my injured throat. He looked away again. I do what they tell me. If I don't... He showed a scar on the back of his neck, half hidden by his hair. But not with the girls that I don't do. That's why they keep me as a house employee, sometimes a driver. I'm the only one they trust not to run away with you. Are there others? He shook his head. Not anymore. The last one couldn't take it. A few months ago. A shiver ran down my spine. Couldn't take it how? Killed herself. Got a kitchen knife somehow. It was quick, at least. He spoke with a coldness that could only come from having seen too many horrors to continue caring. At that moment, I completely understood my situation. It wasn't just the abuse, the physical pain, the humiliation. It was the certainty that no one would come to save me. That no one even knew where I was. That for the outside world, I probably no longer existed. How long? I asked, my voice failing. How long until you can't take it anymore? He completed. Depends. The last one lasted 8 months, the one before almost a year. There was one who lasted 2 years, but in the end, they all end up the same. 2 years? 24 months of that hell. 730 days, if I was lucky. The idea was so overwhelming that I almost wished I had that knife the girl before me had managed to get. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why are you helping me Jimmy shrugged again.
I'm not helping. I'm just doing what I'm told, taking care that you last as long as possible. The doctor invested money in you, wants a return. He stood up, collecting the empty cup. Try to sleep. Tomorrow it all starts again.
And so it was. Day after day, week after week, the same brutal routine. The same men, sometimes new ones when the doctor held business meetings at the ranch. The same pain, the same horror repeated so many times that I began to feel as if that girl who grew up happily on the farm with her father had died, and I was just a ghost occupying a body that no longer belonged to me. I lost track of time. The days blended together. The nights were the same. I tried to mark the days by scratching the wall with a piece of plaster that had come loose, but at some point I stopped counting. For what time had lost its meaning, I began to understand why the girl before me had chosen the knife. Every morning I woke up was a disappointment I was still alive. I would still have to face another day of that hell. Death began to seem like a friend, a liberator, not an enemy. That's when something changed. I can't say exactly when, perhaps 3 or 4 months after my arrival. It was a particularly hot night, the air still and heavy, as it always gets before the big summer storms. I was lying on the bed, looking at the ceiling, my eyes dry, because I had no more tears. And then, out of nowhere, a thought hit me. If I died, they would win. If I killed myself, like the girl before me, I would be giving them exactly what they expected. The doctor would simply buy another girl, and the cycle would continue. Something inside me, something I thought they had killed, awoke. A cold, calculated anger different from the desperate anger of the first days. A determination that was born not from hope, but from the absolute lack of it. If I was going to die, and I was sure I would, it wouldn't be by my own hands. And before I left, I would take some of them with me. It was as if sudden clarity had descended upon me. I began to really observe the patterns, the routines, the weak points. Who drank too much, who let their guard down, who had the keys, who went where and when. I also began to observe Jimmy more closely. He continued to be the only one who treated me with a minimum of humanity, bringing food, clean water herbs for the wounds. He never participated in the abuse, although sometimes he was forced to watch as a reminder from the doctor that he too was property not so different from me. I realized that Jimmy wasn't just the weakest link in that chain of evil. He was someone who, like me, was trapped in a system he hadn't chosen. The difference was that he had resigned himself while I was now determined to fight. I began to talk to him not about escape, not yet, that would be too risky, but about other things. About where we came from, about our families, about life before that place. My father was a cattle driver in Tennessee. He told me one night, while applying herbs to the cuts one of the men had left on my back. Died when I was 12, trampled by a wild bull. My mother couldn't handle the grief and followed soon after. I grew up from ranch to ranch, working for a plate of food. Never thought about escaping from here, I asked, trying to make the question sound casual. He laughed a sound without joy. And go where the doctor has friends everywhere, police, judges, politicians. Stories about this place are hushed up before they even reach the ears of someone who could do something, and who would believe a ranch hand with nothing to his name against a man like him. I didn't respond, but I kept that information. It was true. In a time and place where the powerful made their own laws, who would listen to an orphaned girl, or a family-less ranch hand justice, if it came, would have to come from our own hands. The days continued to pass, and I continued to observe, plan feed, that cold anger that was now my only fuel. I began to become what they least expected, docile. I no longer resisted, didn't scream, didn't cry. This disconcerted some of them at first, but they soon interpreted it as a breaking of spirit, exactly what they wanted. The doctor visited the ranch every 2 weeks, usually staying from Friday to Sunday. He always brought guests, men like him, rich, powerful, with the same insatiable hunger for control and cruelty. During one of these visits, about 6 months after my arrival, I heard something that changed everything. I was serving drinks on the porch, a promotion I had received for my submissive behavior. The doctor was talking with a man I had never seen before, a politician from the capital, from what I understood.
"And how long do you keep them?"
Asked the man, taking a sip of whiskey. "Depends," replied the doctor, lighting a cigar. "When they start to lose their bloom, the charm of novelty, or when they become too sick to be useful. Generally a year and a half. And afterward," the doctor shrugged, "there's a place in the river, a bend where the current is strong. The body goes down to the Ohio, and from there to the Mississippi. To this day, none has appeared." The man nodded, as if they were discussing the fate of old furniture, not human beings. "And the current one, the one serving us, she has been surprising." The doctor smiled, blowing cigar smoke. "I thought she wouldn't last 3 months when she arrived, fought like a wild cat, but now completely domesticated. I might keep her a little longer if she continues like this." I kept my face expressionless, serving another round of drinks to the men. But inside my heart was racing. Now I knew no matter how submissive I was, how domesticated I appeared, my fate was sealed. At some point, when the doctor decided I was worn out, I would be taken to that bend in the river, and my body would go down the current to never be found again. Time was running out. That night, when Jimmy came to bring clean water as he always did, I made the decision. It was time to put him to the test. "I need to tell you something," I whispered, making sure no one could hear. "I heard the doctor talking about what happens when he gets tired of the girls." Jimmy tensed up. "You shouldn't be listening to conversations. The river." I continued, ignoring his warning. "He talked about a place in the river where the current takes the bodies." He set down the water jug, carefully avoiding my eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I know you're not like them," I replied, holding his wrist. "You're trapped here as much as I am, and I know you're not a murderer." "I'm not the one who takes the girls to the river," he said, finally looking into my eyes. "I've never done that." "But you know who does," I insisted. "And you know that one day it will be my turn." He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. I saw the truth in his eyes. "Let's escape together," I proposed, my voice barely above a whisper. "You know this place. You know the routines. I've been observing too. We can do it." "It's suicide," he replied, but I noticed he didn't immediately reject the idea. "They have guns. They have men everywhere. And we have the element of surprise," I argued. "No one expects the domesticated girl to try to escape. No one expects the loyal employee to betray them." I saw the conflict in his eyes, the fear ingrained by years of abuse and control fighting against a spark of hope he probably thought he had lost long ago. "I'll think about it," he finally said, freeing himself from my grip. "But I don't promise anything. And don't talk about it anymore for now. Walls have ears in this place." It was enough. A small victory, a crack in the apparently impenetrable wall of my captivity. In the following days, I maintained my facade of docility, while internally boiling with plans and possibilities. I observed everything with even more attention, the shifts of the men who guarded the ranch, where they kept the keys to the vehicles, who slept heavily after drinking, who was more careless with their weapon. Jimmy kept his distance, more cautious than ever, but I could see in the quick glances we exchanged that he was seriously considering my proposal. The seed had been planted. About a week after our conversation, something happened that both shocked me and accelerated our plans. It was late at night, and I was lying on the bed trying to sleep despite the pain from that day's abuse, when I heard voices outside my window, low, urgent voices. I recognized Jimmy's voice immediately, but there was someone else with him, someone whose voice I didn't recognize. Carefully, I approached the barred window and listened. "Can't keep doing this much longer," Jimmy was saying. "The new girl is starting to ask questions. You knew this day would come."
replied the other voice, a woman's voice I realized with surprise. 3 years is a long time to maintain a cover.
I know, but she's different from the others. She's not broken. She's planning something.
Maybe that's what we need. Someone with enough fight left to help us bring this whole operation down. My heart nearly stopped. Cover operation. What was Jimmy talking about? It's too dangerous, Sarah. Jimmy continued. If the doctor finds out who I really am, we'll both end up in that river. We've already gotten 3 girls out in the past 2 years. Federal marshals are building a case, but we need someone on the inside, someone the doctor trusts. He doesn't trust me. He keeps me around because I'm useful and too scared to run. At least that's what he thinks. Then maybe it's time to bring the girl into this. If she's as smart as you say, I can't risk her life like that. You didn't see what they did to the last one who tried to escape? There was a long pause. Then the woman, Sarah, spoke again. We just intercepted radio chatter. The doctor is planning to liquidate the entire operation next month. He's gotten word that federal investigators are closing in. If we don't act soon, there won't be anyone left to save. My blood ran cold. Liquidate the operation, that could only mean one thing. How much time do we have? Jimmy asked. 2 weeks, maybe 3. There's a convoy planned to move the girls to a new location, but we both know that's not really what's going to happen. The river? The river. I heard footsteps moving away, and I quickly returned to the bed, my mind racing. Jimmy wasn't just another victim, he was working with federal agents. But he was also right about one thing: I was planning something, and now I knew I couldn't do it alone. The next morning, when Jimmy brought my breakfast, I made a decision that would change everything. I heard you talking to Sarah last night, I whispered. His face went white as a sheet, and he nearly dropped the food tray. I don't know what you're talking about. Federal marshals. 3 girls already rescued. The doctor planning to liquidate everyone. I held his gaze steadily. I know who you really are, Jimmy. The question is, are you going to trust me? For a long moment, we stared at each other. I could see him weighing his options, calculating risks. Finally, he set the tray down and sat on the edge of the bed. My name is James Mitchell. I'm an undercover federal agent. I've been working this case for 3 years, trying to gather enough evidence to bring down not just the doctor, but the entire network he's part of.
And Sarah?
My handler. She coordinates with other agents placed throughout the region. This operation is bigger than just this ranch, and we're talking about dozens of girls, multiple locations, connections that reach all the way to Washington. I felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that I wasn't as alone as I'd thought, terror at the scope of what we were up against. You said I was different from the others. What did you mean? Jimmy James looked at me with something like admiration. Most girls who come here are broken within weeks. They either give up completely or they break so badly they can't function. But you adapted. You learned. You started planning. That takes a special kind of strength. Or a special kind of desperation. Maybe both. He leaned forward. Sarah thinks we should bring you into the operation. Help you escape, but keep you close enough to gather intelligence. What kind of intelligence? Names, locations, financial records. The doctor keeps files on all his merchandise. If we could get access to those files, we could save not just me, but everyone else he has in this network. Exactly. But Anne, I have to be honest with you. This isn't just dangerous. It's almost certainly suicide. If we're caught, we're dead anyway. I finished. You said it yourself, he's planning to liquidate everyone. At least this way we die fighting. James nodded slowly. I'll contact Sarah tonight. But from now on, you have to be even more careful. One wrong move, one suspicious glance, and this whole thing falls apart. I understand. As he stood to leave, I grabbed his arm. Ah, James. The other girls you helped escape. What happened to them? He smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him. They're safe. New identities, new lives. 2 of them are married, now have children. One became a social worker, helps other victims. They made it, Anne, and so will you. 3 days later, just as James and I were finalizing the details of our plan, something happened that none of us had anticipated.
I was in the kitchen serving lunch to the men when I heard a car approaching, not the doctor's usual vehicle, but something smaller, older. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure stepping out of a beat-up sedan. My blood turned to ice. Carmen. She looked older, thinner, her red lipstick now a harsh slash across pale lips. But it was unmistakably her, the woman who had sold me to these monsters. I dropped the plate I was holding, and it shattered on the floor. Several men looked up annoyed by the noise.
"Clean that up, you clumsy bitch," Tonho snarled.
But I couldn't move. I was frozen watching through the window as Carmen approached the house with confident steps as if she belonged here. The front door opened, and I heard her voice that same sweet fake tone she used to use with my father.
"Hello, boys. Is the doctor in? I have some business to discuss with him."
Carmen. The older man with gray hair stood up grinning.
"Didn't expect to see you back so soon. The doctor's not here, but he should be back this evening." "Perfect, I'll wait."
She entered the main room, and her eyes immediately found mine. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Was it guilt-fear? But then her expression hardened.
Well, well, look who's still here. How are you adjusting to your new life stepdaughter?"
The men laughed at her casual cruelty, but I noticed James, who had been cleaning in the corner, tense up. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw the question there. "Do you want me to intervene?" I shook my head slightly. I needed to hear what Carmen was planning.
"You look well."
Carmen continued walking around me in a slow circle.
"A little thinner, perhaps, but that's to be expected.
Are you grateful, Anne, for the opportunity I gave you?" Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, to attack her, to tear her apart with my bare hands. But I had learned to control myself to appear docile, even while fury burned inside me.
"Yes, ma'am,"
I said quietly. "Good girl. Always knew you were smart." She turned to the gray-haired man.
"Actually, Frank, she's part of why I'm here. I have another girl even younger than this one was. The doctor might be interested."
My heart stopped. Another girl. How many lives was this woman willing to destroy for money?
"Another orphan?"
Frank asked, interested. Even better. A runaway. No family looking for her, no missing person reports. She's been staying with me for the past few months, but she's getting troublesome. Asking too many questions, threatening to go to the authorities.
"How old?" 15. Pretty little thing hasn't been touched yet. The doctor will like her."
I felt sick. A 15-year-old girl, just a child.
"What's her story?" Frank pressed.
Carmen shrugged.
"Ran away from a foster home in Ohio. Been living on the streets. I found her at a bus station, offered her a place to stay. Told her I'd help her get back on her feet. And now she's a liability, but also an opportunity. I'm thinking the same price as before, 3,000.
I'll have to talk to the doctor, but I don't see why not. Business has been good." As they continued discussing the sale of a child as if she were livestock, I caught James's eye again. This changed everything. We couldn't just worry about escaping. We had to stop Carmen from bringing another victim here. That evening, when the doctor arrived and went into his private office with Carmen James, and I managed to meet briefly in the storage room.
"We have to stop this,"
I whispered urgently.
"That girl, whoever she is, we can't let them bring her here."
"I know. I've already sent word to Sarah. They're trying to track down Carmen's location, find the girl before the exchange happens."
"When is it supposed to happen?"
"Tomorrow night. Carmen's bringing her then."
"That's not enough time." "I know, which is why we're moving up our timeline. We're getting you out of here tomorrow during the chaos of the exchange."
I shook my head.
"Not just me. Her too. We save both of us or neither. And that's
non-negotiable. I won't save myself and leave a child to suffer what I've suffered." James stared at me for a long moment, then nodded.
"You're right. We save both of you, or we die trying."
From the office, we could hear raised voices, Carmen and the doctor arguing about something. "What are they fighting about?" I whispered.
James pressed his ear to the wall. "Can't make it out clearly, but wait." His face went pale. "The doctor is saying something about cleaning house. He's planning to accelerate the timeline." "What does that mean?" "It means tomorrow night might be too late, for all of us."
Suddenly, the office door slammed open, and Carmen stormed out, her face flushed with anger.
Deal's off,
She shouted back toward the office.
You're a fool if you think I'm going down with this ship.
The doctor appeared in the doorway, calm but cold. Carmen, you're being emotional. Think about what you're giving up. I'm thinking about prison, or worse. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Find yourself another supplier, doctor. I'm done with this business. As she passed me, she paused and leaned in close. You should pray that girl stays wherever she is, she whispered. Because if she ends up here, it'll be on your conscience, not mine. With that, she was gone, leaving behind only the sound of her sedan driving away into the night. The doctor stood in the doorway for a moment, then turned to Frank.
Change of plans. We move everything up. Tomorrow morning we clean house and relocate. All of it.
My blood ran cold. Clean house meant only one thing. They were going to kill me. That night, as the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet, James came to my room earlier than usual. His face was grim.
Sarah intercepted the doctor's communications. The cleanup is scheduled for dawn in about 6 hours.
What about the girl Carmen mentioned?
Safe. Federal agents found her at a motel in Louisville. Carmen abandoned her there when she decided not to go through with the deal.
I felt a wave of relief followed immediately by terror as the reality of our situation hit me.
6 hours? What's the plan? Sarah and a team of federal agents are positioned around the ranch, but they can't move in until we have the evidence we need: the doctor's files, financial records, the names and locations of other operations.
And those are in his office, in a safe behind that painting of horses. You've seen inside it.
Once, about a year ago when he was drunk and careless. But I couldn't get close enough to memorize the combination.
I thought for a moment.
I might be able to get it.
How? The doctor likes to watch. When he brings his important guests, he sometimes has me serve in his office while they conduct business. He thinks of me as furniture invisible, harmless. I've seen him open that safe at least 3 times.
And you remember the combination? Partially. It's a 6-digit number. I know the first 4 digits are 1948.
Your birth year?
It gets worse.
I think the last 2 digits might be 17, my age when I arrived here. He's that twisted. James ran his hands through his hair.
So the combination might be 1948-7. It's our best guess. But James, even if we get into the safe, how do we get the evidence to the federal agents without getting killed in the process?
That's where it gets dangerous. We have to create enough chaos to cover our escape, but not so much that the doctor has time to destroy the evidence.
What kind of chaos?
James hesitated.
A fire. In the barn where they keep the vehicles. It'll draw everyone outside, give us maybe 10 minutes alone in the main house. And after we get the files, we run. Sarah has people positioned along 3 different escape routes. We just have to make it to the tree line.
I looked out the small window at the distance between the house and the woods. It seemed impossibly far.
What about weapons?
I've managed to hide a pistol in the root cellar. Not much, but it's something.
When do we start?
James checked his watch.
In 2 hours, 3 a.m. Most of them will be asleep or drunk.
And if we get caught? He met my eyes. Then we make sure our deaths mean something. The federal agents are prepared to raid at the first sign of gunfire evidence or no evidence. At least the doctor's operation ends tonight, one way or another. The next 2 hours felt like an eternity. I lay on the thin mattress, fully clothed, trying to control my breathing and prepare myself mentally for what was to come. I thought about my father, about the girl I used to be, about all the women who had suffered in this place before me. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard the soft scrape of a key in my lock. James entered silently, carrying a small bag.
You ready?
I nodded, not trusting my voice. We crept through the dark hallways of the house. Most of the men were asleep, their snores echoing through the thin walls. The few night guards were outside, patrolling the perimeter, or so we hoped.
When we reached the kitchen, James handed me a small flashlight and a bundle of cloth. The cloth is for the smoke. When I set the fire, the wind will carry it toward the house. Cover your mouth and nose. Through the kitchen window, we could see the barn where the vehicles were kept. James would have to cross about 50 yards of open ground to reach it. Give me 5 minutes to get to the barn, then another 5 to set the fire. When you see the flames count to 30, then go to the office.
And what if someone sees you? Then you abort. Don't try to be a hero, Anne. Just run for the woods and find Sarah. He squeezed my hand briefly, then slipped out the back door into the night. I watched from the window as his dark shape moved across the yard, staying low, using the shadows of outbuildings for cover. He reached the barn safely, and I began counting minutes in my head. At exactly 10 minutes, I saw the first orange flicker of flame inside the barn. Within seconds, it had spread to the hay stored there, and the entire structure was blazing. Almost immediately, I heard shouts from outside. Men running, yelling orders, the sound of boots on wooden floors as everyone in the house woke up. "Fire everyone out! The barn's on fire!" I counted to 30, then slipped out of the kitchen and down the hall toward the doctor's office. The house was chaos, men running back and forth, grabbing buckets, shouting instructions. In the confusion, no one noticed one small figure moving in the opposite direction. The office door was unlocked. I slipped inside and closed it behind me, turning on the small flashlight. The painting of horses hung exactly where I remembered, and behind it was the safe. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the dial. I forced myself to take a deep breath and focus. First digit 1, second 9, third 4, fourth 8. I paused. What if I was wrong about the last 2 digits? What if it wasn't my age when I arrived? From outside, I could hear the fire growing louder, more chaotic. I was running out of time. Fifth digit 1, sixth 7. I turned the handle. Nothing. The safe remained locked. Panic began to set in. I tried again, slower this time. 194817. Still nothing. Wait. What if it wasn't 17? What if it was something else? My mind raced through possibilities. 1948-65, the year I was brought here. 1948-65. Click. The safe opened. Inside were stacks of documents, ledgers, photographs, and what looked like business correspondence. I grabbed everything I could fit in my shirt, stuffing papers inside like a kangaroo pouch. That's when I heard the office door open behind me. Well, what do we have here? I spun around to find the doctor standing in the doorway, a pistol in his hand. Behind him was Tanho, his scarred face twisted in a cruel grin. I have to admit I'm impressed. The doctor continued, stepping into the room. For months you played the part of the broken, submissive girl so well. I actually believed you'd accepted your fate. I backed against the safe, the stolen documents burning against my skin. Cat got your tongue? No witty last words. Actually, I said, finding my voice, I do have something to say. Oh, do tell. I smiled, the first genuine smile I'd had in months. You should have checked your employees more carefully. The doctor frowned. What do you mean? I mean, Jimmy James Mitchell, federal agent James Mitchell says hello. The doctor's face went white. At that exact moment, we heard gunshots from outside, followed by men shouting, "Federal agents! Everyone on the ground!" The doctor spun toward the window, and in that split second of distraction, I acted. I lunged forward, not at him, but at the kerosene lamp on his desk. I grabbed it and hurled it at the wall, where it shattered and sent flames racing up the wooden paneling. Tanho shouted and lunged for me, but the doctor grabbed his arm. No, we need her alive. She's our only bargaining chip. But I wasn't planning to be anyone's bargaining chip ever again. The office filled with smoke as the flames spread rapidly up the old dry wood of the walls. The doctor and Tanho were both coughing, their eyes watering, but they stood between me and the door. Give me the documents, the doctor shouted over the crackling of the fire. Give them to me and I'll make sure you die quickly. No deal? I replied, backing toward the window. Outside, the gunfire was intensifying. Through the smoke, I could see muzzle flashes in the yard. James had done it. The federal agents were here. The doctor raised his pistol, pointing it directly at my chest. I've invested too much in this operation to let one farm girl destroy it. Those documents never leave this room. Then neither do we, I said. That's when I heard the most beautiful sound in the world, James's voice shouting from somewhere outside the office. And get down. I dropped to the floor just as the office window exploded inward.
James came through in a shower of glass rolling and coming up with his weapon drawn. "Federal agent, drop your weapons." Tonho swung his shotgun toward James, but he was too slow. James fired twice, and Tonho dropped to the floor, clutching his shoulder. The doctor, however, had used the distraction to move closer to me. Before James could react, the doctor grabbed me around the throat, pressing his pistol to my head. "Stand down, Agent Mitchell. One more step, and she dies." James kept his weapon trained on the doctor, but I could see the conflict in his eyes. The flames were spreading rapidly now, and smoke was filling the room. We had maybe minutes before the entire office became an inferno. "Let her go, Doctor," James said calmly. "It's over. Your entire network is being rolled up as we speak. Federal agents are hitting locations in 5 states simultaneously." "Maybe so, but I still have one card to play." The doctor's grip tightened around my throat. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop your weapon and step aside. The girl and I are going to walk out of here, get in my car, and drive away. Once I'm safely across the state line, I'll let her go." "We both know that's not true," James replied. "Perhaps not, but it's the only chance she has." That's when I remembered something the doctor had said months ago during one of his visits. He had been drinking, talking to his guests about his philosophy. "Power," I said suddenly, "isn't about what you can do to someone. It's about what you can make them do to themselves." The doctor's grip loosened slightly in surprise. "What?" "That's what you told Senator Richardson last spring. You said the real pleasure wasn't in breaking us. It was in making us break ourselves." I could feel his confusion, his momentary distraction. It was all I needed. I drove my elbow backward into his ribs, with all my strength spinning away from his grip as he doubled over in pain. James moved instantly, tackling the doctor before he could raise his weapon again. They struggled on the floor as the flames grew higher around us. Tonho, despite his wounded shoulder, was trying to crawl toward his fallen shotgun. I grabbed a heavy ledger from the desk and brought it down on the back of his head. He went limp. And James shouted, "The door!" The office door was blocked by flames now, but the window James had come through was still clear. I climbed through, first cutting my hands on the remaining glass, then turned to help James. The doctor was unconscious, whether from the struggle or smoke inhalation I couldn't tell. James grabbed him under the arms and dragged him toward the window. "We can't leave him," he shouted. "We need him alive to testify." Together we managed to get the doctor through the window and onto the ground outside. Federal agents immediately surrounded us, some tending to our injuries, others securing the unconscious doctor and the wounded Tonho. Sarah, a tall, authoritative woman with kind eyes, approached us as EMTs checked our burns and cuts. "The documents?" she asked. I pulled the papers from inside my shirt, many of them singed but still readable. "Everything that was in the safe?" She quickly scanned through them, her eyes widening. "Names, locations, financial records? And this is enough to destroy the entire network. Dozens of other operations, hundreds of victims, they're all going to be saved because of what you did tonight." As the EMTs loaded the doctor into an ambulance, he regained consciousness briefly. His eyes found mine across the chaotic scene. "This isn't over," he wheezed. "There are others, more powerful than me. They'll find you." I walked over to the stretcher and looked down at him. "Let them try. I'm not that scared girl anymore, and I'm not alone." As they drove him away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in 8 months' hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of debriefings, medical examinations, and legal proceedings. The documents we had recovered led to the largest human trafficking bust in U.S. history at that time. 23 separate operations were shut down across 5 states, and 187 women and girls were rescued. The doctor, whose real name was Dr. Marcus Thornfield, was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Tonho and most of his associates received lengthy sentences as well. Carmen was eventually tracked down in Mexico and extradited to face charges as well. But for me, the most important moment came 3 weeks after the raid, when Sarah sat down with me in a small office in Louisville. "And you have some choices to make about your future." "What do you mean?" "Your legal identity is complicated. Technically, you're still a minor, and your father's estate was never properly settled. We can help you reclaim your name and property, but Dr. Thornfield was telling the truth about one thing. His network was part of something bigger. There are people who might come looking for you seeking revenge for what you helped us accomplish.
I thought about this for a long moment.
What's the alternative? A new identity? A fresh start somewhere far from here. We've done it for other survivors.
And James, Sarah smiled.
Agent Mitchell has requested a transfer to our Victim Services Division. If you choose the new identity route, he's volunteered to help you adjust to your new life, if you want his help, that is.
I looked out the window at the city beyond. Louisville was bigger than any place I'd ever seen, full of strangers and possibilities. The scared girl from Cougar Hollow might have been overwhelmed by such a choice. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I want the new identity, I said. But I want to stay involved. Other women are going through what I went through. I want to help them.
That can be arranged. What name would you like?
I thought about my father, about the girl I used to be, about the woman I was becoming.
Mary Cooper, I said finally. Mary Ann Cooper.
And so Anne Frances Sanders died officially in the fire at Dr. Thornfield's ranch.
Mary Cooper was born from those ashes, carrying with her all the pain and strength of her former life, but looking toward a future filled with possibility. James, who had also taken a new identity as Joseph Miller, and I traveled to New York City in the fall of 1965. The federal government provided us with basic documentation and a small stipend to help us get started, but the rest was up to us. Those early days in the Bronx were hard in ways different from the ranch, but hard nonetheless. We lived in a tiny studio apartment above a bodega, sharing the space platonically, while we both dealt with our respective traumas. Joseph worked construction jobs during the day. I found work in a textile factory, my childhood skills with needle and thread finally proving useful in ways my father never could have imagined. The city was overwhelming at first, so many people, so much noise, so many strangers. But it was also liberating. In New York, no one knew our stories. We could be whoever we chose to be. Joseph and I became each other's anchors during those difficult early months. We had seen each other at our absolute worst and somehow survived together. That created a bond stronger than romance, though romance did come later, slowly and carefully built on a foundation of deep trust and mutual respect. We married in 1968 in a small ceremony at City Hall with Sarah as our witness. By then, we had moved to a better apartment in Queens and had begun to build something resembling a normal life. Our daughter, Hope, was born in 1970, and our son, Daniel, in 1973. Watching them grow up safe and loved was a daily miracle. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee I kissed, better every proud moment at school plays and soccer games was a victory over the darkness that could have consumed us. But we never forgot where we came from, or the women who were still trapped in situations like ours had been. In 1975, Sarah contacted us with news that changed our lives again. She was leaving federal service to start a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping survivors of human trafficking. She wanted us to be part of it. You two understand what these women are going through in ways that no textbook can teach, she told us over dinner at our kitchen table. Your experience combined with the training we can provide could save a lot of lives. Joseph and I looked at each other across the table. We had built a comfortable life, had steady jobs, 2 beautiful children. Getting involved in anti-trafficking work would mean opening old wounds, reliving painful memories. But it would also mean ensuring that other women didn't have to suffer as we had. What would it involve? Joseph asked. Initially, just opening your home occasionally to women who need a safe place to stay while they transition to new lives. Later, if you're comfortable, maybe sharing your story with law enforcement, helping them understand the psychology of trafficking victims. I thought about the 15-year-old girl Carmen had tried to bring to the ranch, the one who was saved because of our actions. How many others were out there right now trapped and hopeless? We'll do it, I said.
And so our house in Queens became an unofficial safe house. Over the years, dozens of women stayed with us, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for months. We helped them navigate the legal system, find jobs, locate family members, or simply learn to trust again. Hope and Daniel grew up understanding that their parents were survivors who had chosen to become helpers. They both eventually chose careers in social service. Hope became a social worker, specializing in trauma therapy. Daniel, a lawyer, focusing on victims' rights. In 1982, we officially founded the New Dawn Association, a comprehensive support center for trafficking survivors. By the 1990s, we were running 3 shelters and had helped over 500 women build new lives. The work was emotionally exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. Every woman who walked through our doors carrying the same fear and brokenness I had once carried was a chance to rewrite the ending of my own story. In 1991, 26 years after my escape from the ranch, I received a phone call that brought my past rushing back. "Mary, it's Miss Thelma." I almost dropped the phone. Miss Thelma, the healer, who had nursed Joseph and me back to health after our escape, who had helped us get false documents and safe passage to New York. I hadn't heard from her in decades. "Miss Thelma, how did you find me?"
"Child, I never lost track of you. Been watching your work from afar, reading about that organization you started. Makes an old woman proud."
Her voice was frailer than I remembered, but still warm.
"I'm calling because I need your help. There's something happening down here in Kentucky, something you need to know about."
"What is it?" "That doctor, Dr. Thornfield, he's dead. Killed in prison 3 months ago by another inmate. But before he died, he made some kind of confession. Told the authorities about other places, other operations that were never shut down."
My blood ran cold.
"How many?" "Dozens, Mary. Dozens of places across the South where girls are still being held. The FBI is overwhelmed. They need people who understand how these operations work. People who can help identify victims and locations." "And you think I should come back?" "I think those girls need someone who understands what they're going through. Someone who survived and built something beautiful from the ashes." That night, Joseph and I talked until dawn. Returning to Kentucky meant facing memories we had spent decades processing. It meant potentially putting ourselves in danger from whatever remained of Thornfield's network. But it also meant saving girls who were living the nightmare I had escaped.
We decided to go. The 3 weeks I spent in Kentucky were some of the most difficult of my life. Working with federal agents and local law enforcement, we identified and raided 17 different locations where women and girls were being held. 43 victims were rescued. But the most difficult moment came when I visited the site of the old ranch where I had been held captive. The main house had been demolished years earlier, but the foundation remained, along with the barn and some of the outbuildings. Standing there in the overgrown field, I could still hear the echoes of screams, still smell the smoke from the night of our escape. Joseph stood beside me, holding my hand, as I wept for the girl I had been and the woman I had become. "She's gone," I whispered. "That scared, broken girl, she's finally gone." "No," Joseph replied gently. "She's not gone. She's right here inside you, but she's not scared anymore. She's strong. She's a survivor. She's a fighter."
On the drive back to the airport, Miss Thelma, now in her 80s but still sharp, sat in the back seat of our rental car.
"You did good work here, child," she said. "Those girls you helped save, they're going to have a chance at life because of you."
"I couldn't have done it without you, Miss Thelma. You saved my life all those years ago."
"No, honey. I just patched you up and pointed you in the right direction. You saved your own life, and then you spent the next 25 years saving others."
As the plane lifted off from Louisville, I looked down at the landscape below the hills and hollows of Kentucky, where my story had begun. I felt a sense of closure. I hadn't expected, a feeling that the circle was finally complete. The 1990s and early 2000s were what I came to think of as our golden years. Hope and Daniel were both established in their careers and had given us grandchildren to spoil. The New Dawn Association had grown into a nationally recognized organization. Joseph and I had found a rhythm of work and rest that allowed us to remain active in the anti-trafficking movement while also enjoying the fruits of our labor. We traveled something that had once terrified me, but which I now embraced. We saw London, Paris, Rome. We visited the beaches of California, and the mountains of Colorado. Every new place was a reminder of how big and beautiful the world was, beyond the small, dark places where we had once been trapped. But perhaps the most meaningful travels were the ones that took us to speak at conferences and training sessions for law enforcement social workers and other first responders. Our story had become a teaching tool, a way to help others understand the complex psychology of trafficking victims. The most important thing to remember, I would tell audiences, is that survival looks different for everyone. Some victims fight from day one. Others, like me, learn to appear compliant while planning their escape. There is no right or wrong way to survive, there is only survival itself. In 1998, we published a book about our experiences, Sold and Reborn: A Survivor's Story. I wrote it under my original name, Anne Frances Sanders, as a way of reclaiming that identity without abandoning the life I had built as Mary Cooper. The book became a bestseller and led to speaking opportunities around the world. More importantly, it generated funding that allowed us to expand our services and help even more survivors. Joseph died in 2005 on a beautiful spring morning in our garden in Queens. He had been battling cancer for 2 years, and in the end, it was peaceful. He died holding my hand, surrounded by our children and grandchildren in the same house where we had sheltered so many other survivors over the years. His death devastated me in ways I hadn't expected. We had been through so much together, trauma healing, building a life and family from nothing. He had been my anchor, my partner in every sense of the word. For a while, I considered stepping back from public life entirely. I was 67 years old, had been fighting this fight for 40 years. Hadn't I done enough? But then I received a letter from a young woman named Sarah, not my old federal agent friend, but a 19-year-old who had been rescued from a trafficking situation in Miami. She had read our book and wanted to thank me. "Your story gave me hope when I had none," she wrote. Knowing that someone had been through what I went through and built a beautiful life afterward, it made me believe I could do the same. That letter reminded me that our story wasn't just our own anymore. It belonged to every survivor who needed to believe that healing was possible, that the trauma didn't have to define the rest of their lives. I continued working, scaling back my involvement, but remaining connected to the New Dawn Association and the broader anti-trafficking movement. Hope took over much of the day-to-day operations, bringing fresh energy and new ideas to the organization. In 2018, at the age of 70, I made a decision that surprised even me. I moved back to Kentucky. Not to Cougar Hollow, that settlement was long gone, turned into a housing development, but to Westridge, a small town about 30 miles from where I had grown up. I bought a little house with a garden and began what I thought would be a quiet retirement. Instead, I found myself busier than ever. Word spread quickly about the trafficking survivor turned advocate who had moved to town. Social workers, counselors, and law enforcement officers began reaching out asking for training and consultation. I also began teaching crafts, the same corn husk and fabric scrap arts my father had watched me create as a child. It seemed fitting somehow to return to those simple skills that connected me to happier times. The local women who came to my craft classes didn't initially know my story. To them, I was just Miss Anne, the craftswoman who could turn anything into something beautiful. But gradually, as trust built, some began sharing their own stories of abuse, domestic violence, and trauma. My living room became an informal support group. Women would come for craft lessons and stay for conversation advice, and sometimes just a safe place to cry. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic, I started making videos, initially just craft tutorials for the women who couldn't come to my house during lockdown. But gradually, the videos evolved into something more personal. I began telling my story. And that brings us to today, my dear friends. I'm 75 years old now, sitting in my little house in Westridge, Kentucky, telling you a story that began more than half a century ago. The doctor died in prison. Carmen died of cancer in 2010 alone and unmourned. Most of the men who hurt me are dead or imprisoned. The ranch where I was held has been turned into a memorial garden for trafficking victims maintained by the state of Kentucky. Justice of a sort has been served. But the real victory isn't in their punishment, it's in what grew from the ashes of that trauma. 2 children, who became advocates for the vulnerable, hundreds of women who found safety and healing through our organization, thousands of others who heard our story and found the strength to escape their own situations or seek help. The real victory is in the simple fact that I'm sitting here today in a house I own, in a community where I'm known and respected, telling this story in my own words and in my own time. I want to end with a message for anyone watching who sees themselves in my story. Anyone who has been trafficked, abused, or made to feel like they are less than human. Your story doesn't end with the trauma. What they did to you, that's just one chapter, not the entire book. You have the power to write the next chapters, and they can be more beautiful and meaningful than you ever imagined. It won't be easy. Healing never is. There will be days when the pain feels unbearable, when the memories threaten to overwhelm you. But you are stronger than you know, and you are not alone. Find your Jimmy. Find someone who sees your humanity when others see only damaged goods. Find your Miss Thelma. Find someone who can help you heal without judgment. Find your Sarah. Find someone who believes in your strength and your worth. And most importantly, when you're ready, when you've done the work of healing yourself, consider helping others who are still trapped in the darkness you escaped. There is no more powerful force in the world than a survivor who transforms their pain into purpose. I was born Anne Frances Sanders in 1948 in a tiny settlement that no longer exists. I was sold into slavery at 17. I was broken, brutalized, and left for dead. But I survived. I escaped. I healed. I built a beautiful life filled with love, purpose, and meaning. And if I can do it, so can you. That's my story, dear ones. That's the truth I wanted to leave behind before I joined my Joseph and my father in whatever comes next. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, your story isn't over yet.